We are joined now by Senator Marco Rubio from the great state of Florida. Senator Rubio, thanks for coming on with us. Hope the morning's going well.
Hey, good morning. Well, it's only 8 o'clock, so anything could happen, but so far so good.
All right, join the club there. Let's talk a little bit about, before we get into this name, image, and likeness bill, you are a big fan, I believe if I'm correct, of the Miami Dolphins and the Florida Gators. I think that's true. All right, let's start with the Miami Dolphins. What do you think of the Tua draft pick, and how do you think he's going to do as a member of the Dolphins? Do you expect him to play? What kind of optimism do you have in the Brian Flores regime as we get ready for year two?
Well, I'm very optimistic about Coach Flores. It's being a little bit around the franchise. I mean, he's a leader. Everybody raves about that, even the guys who have left the team and gone to different places. And as far as the two, I don't know him. Obviously, I've watched him as a fan of the SEC. And look, he's a special kid. I mean, when you see a guy come in at halftime at 18 years of age in the national championship game, in front of the entire, country and take a bad sack, right? I think it was on a second down in overtime, and then just come back like if nothing happened on third down and look a safety off and hit this guy down the sideline to win the national championship. He's 18 years old. So, it gives you some confidence about what's inside him. And actually, it's a guy I've watched since high school. I'm a big fan of high school, so I remember him in the Elite 11 and all the quarterback deals. So he's got the real quick release. He's scary accurate. Obviously, I think he'd be the second pick in that draft, maybe the third, had it not been for the freak hip injury. So my understanding is he's in the building, or he was yesterday for the first time, so they'll have a better assessment of it. But I think when he's ready to play, he's going to play. They didn't draft him to hold a clipboard, so it'll just be up to that.
All right, so you're also a Florida Gator fan. Florida now, Dan Mullen seems to have things going pretty well. Last year, due to the injury to Franks, in comes a guy, Kyle Trask, not a lot of expectation about him. He played fantastically well. How good do you think he can be now that he's got the team, he's had the entire offseason? What do you expect from him now this year?
It's funny. I used to hear about him all the time from guys that were coaching there or had coached there, and they'd all say, this guy's good. I mean, he's very good, obviously, always with the caveat that Felipe was going to be the starter and so forth. But then he gets a chance to play, and you could just see, there's a lot of things working for him. He's a big, strong guy. He's very smart. He's mature. I think he's a grad student now at this point. I think he might be 22 at this point, 21. And he's got that season under his belt. And they continue to, Florida now has playmakers across the field. And, Dan, I think, is one of those guys that has been one of the innovators from his time back in Utah of sort of this positionless football, right, where you basically are putting five guys on the field that are basically playmakers, and no matter if you line them up wide or in the backfield, and what you really need is a guy to kind of distribute that accurately and smart. And that's what I think they have. So defensively, I think they're young, obviously, especially back in the secondary, but they've got some guys to play. Look, Florida's going to be in the mix. It's just the SEC. I mean, it's like, it's a very tough place to get out of. When you look at LSU and Alabama and teams like that and some of the other programs that I think are on an upswing, in Kentucky and stuff and so forth. So, but I feel good about Florida. I think the program is back on the right track and in a very good positive direction. So I'm excited about that.
We're talking to Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. How important is football and sports in general being back to the country, retaining and regaining a sense of normalcy given what we've been going through?
Well, look, I mean, it starts out with the fact that just because you're a football player, it's not to make you sort of a Roman gladiator, right? I mean, your life has to be, your safety issues have to be taken into account, and not just for the players, but for the coaches, the officials, and everybody else that's working these things. So I think we've learned a lot over the last few months about how this spreads and how it could be prevented and who it hurts the most and so forth. So you have to have right protocols in place. That said, if you look at the state of our country, okay, and the divisions that we have, there are increasingly less and less places that become sort of a shared experience among Americans. I mean, increasingly we get our news from different outlets that tell us what we want to hear. Politics seems to have infused itself into our identity as individuals to a point where there are people that have been longtime friends, even family members, that stop speaking to each other after the 2016 election. But the one place where you kind of see people continue to have sort of a common interest, where on Saturday afternoons in the fall or Sundays across the NFL, you have people, or any sport for that matter, you have people of all kinds of backgrounds and political views have a common experience, and that is they are a fan of a team, and they want that team to be successful. So it really is important not to distract us from the problems. There's no doubt these problems need to be confronted. They're serious, they're real, they've been ignored for far too long. But to sort of continue to give us the sort of a unifying experience as a country. So I don't want to overstate it, but I do think it matters, especially given everything that's gone on this year.
Would you take so I'm a season ticket holder for the Tennessee Titans. I've said on the show, and we're talking to Senator Marco Rubio, that I would take, assuming that there are protocols in place and that fans are allowed to go to games. I know you have kids. I've got 3 young kids. I would take my kids. I'd go with my wife to a football game this fall. Would you go to a Florida Gator game or to a Miami Dolphin game if there are protocols in place to allow fans? Would you take your family?
I would, and obviously we're going to wear a mask. Some people say, "I don't, that you can't make me." I would wear a mask just like we wear a seatbelt. I would make sure that we're taking all the safety protocols, because ultimately the bottom line is that we cannot. Look, this virus is a serious virus. It obviously is going to kill some people, unfortunately and tragically. And so we have to take it very serious. But as long as there's no vaccine, as long as there's no cure, it will remain a threat, and we will have infections. And so what we have to do is we have to mitigate the risk. We have to prevent the spread. We have to do things to protect ourselves and to protect others. But we can't indefinitely shut down the economy or our lives. It's just not a reasonable proposition, and people won't comply anyways. So I think the obligation that we have is to continue to put money towards developing the vaccine and the treatments that we need to diminish and or eliminate the risk, but also to take steps to inform the public of how they can protect themselves, and in mass gatherings to try to enforce to the extent possible or encourage those practices. But sure, I would, obviously, but it would be a different kind of experience, right? It wouldn't be, I don't think you can be able to pack, people that are not from the same households right on top of each other. So there's no doubt that the season this year is going to be different. It's going to be different up and down, from high school all the way up to the NFL. It's and all the other sports.
We're talking to Marco Rubio, Senator from Florida. You can find him on Twitter at Marco Rubio. I saw your staff notified, and they also sent out tweets. We were talking about the importance of sports coming back. I believe you had a phone conversation with Rob Manfred, the commissioner of Major League Baseball, about the importance of Major League Baseball coming back. What can you tell me about that conversation? Are you optimistic as someone in the state of Florida? Certainly there are teams in Miami and in Tampa Bay, Major League Baseball. Are you optimistic that Major League Baseball will be back this summer? And what did that conversation with the commissioner, what was it like?
Yeah, and I called him. I reached out to Major League Baseball. I told them, I was going to sort of be saying something about it pretty soon, but I wanted them to know. And then I was able to speak to the commissioner on the phone. And basically, I got from that conversation that he wants there to be a season, that he sees a path forward, that obviously, players have to agree and you have to have everything in place. But he felt, cautiously optimistic. And so, I want to share in that optimism. And again, look, I think it is important to do it in a way that the players are protected and so forth. But by the same token, I think that we have people whose jobs, people think this is just about the players. We have people who work at these stadiums down at Marlins Park, over where the Rays play, and they're not working right now. With the event staff, the concessions folks, and all the suppliers to that are being hurt by it. So there is a spillover effect beyond simply the fan base and the sport. So, like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think the players want to play. I think the owners want to play. And I think the question is whether they can agree, obviously, on the terms of how that will look like, whether it's, 60 games or whatever it is that they're debating right now. We didn't get into the details of that conversation, but he didn't go into detail. I don't necessarily want to be involved in a labor negotiation. It's not, it's not what my job is, but I do know that I just wanted to reiterate how important it is for the country to be able to have events like this, if it can be done safely and in a way that everybody agrees to do it. And so I left that conversation cautiously optimistic. I hope there'll be good news in the next few days. We'll find out here pretty soon, I guess.
Marco Rubio, Senator from Florida, with us. So we talked about college football and the fact that you're a Florida Gator fan. One of the challenges that's going on right now is we are starting to see a patchwork of state legislation dealing with players' rights to profit off their name, image, or likeness. The ability to sign autographs, the ability to get an endorsement, maybe to post on Instagram or Twitter. And as a result, that could be a little bit complicated. The state of Florida has passed a law that would go into effect next year. You, I believe, are planning to introduce or have already introduced, you can give us the latest on this, a name, image, and likeness bill that would allow college athletes to profit off of their name, image, and likeness. What exactly are you introducing, and why is it important for federal legislation to be involved?
Well, let me say selfishly, if it's just from a fan's perspective, I wouldn't do anything because Florida, along with California, now have an advantage, right? And that is beginning at the end of June of next year. And if an athlete comes to the University of Miami or comes to Central Florida or comes to the University of Florida or FSU or South Florida, what have you, they're going to be able to make some money on their name, image, and likeness, and that, even if it's not a booster not doing it, but just the fact that that's in place is going to be a recruiting advantage. The problem we have is college football, particularly the monetized sports, right? College football, basketball, the guys with the TV contracts. These sports are not going to be able to survive long term if you have 50 different states and recruiting becomes impacted by this. So we need to have a national standard. I don't think Congress should write the national standard, frankly. I think the NCAA needs to. And so what the bill does is it basically says the NCAA has until the end of June of next year to come up with what that standard looks like. And it puts some fences around it. They have to allow them to have professional representation, again, subject to the laws that regulate agents and so forth. They have to require disclosures so that to both the university and the NCAA, so we know who's compensating players and so forth. It has to preserve their amateur status. It has to have appropriate measures in place to make sure that it's not part of recruiting or that boosters are not getting involved in this at the front end, going after high school athletes. But other than that, it's up to them to design it. If they do not design it by June 30th, then the Federal Trade Commission is empowered to authorize rules under the Unfair Deceptive Practices statute. So, that is, but it would preempt the state laws. So now you would have a national standard across the board for all 50 states, as opposed to this patchwork, which I think would be, devastating. I just say this to people: the debate about whether or not athletes who are amateurs should be able to earn compensation for their name, their image, and their likeness. That's no longer the issue. That's happening. Two big states, two of the three largest states in the country have now passed a law allowing that. The only issue now that remains is, are we going to have 50 different laws out there about how it's regulated, or are we going to have a uniform and even playing field? And if we don't have a uniform and even playing field, I think it will severely damage college athletics up and down, to all the sports, including the ones that may not generate a lot of revenue, but depend on the revenue from the other sports.
What are you hearing from Democrats, Republicans? Does this seem to be a partisan issue, or is it one that many different Democrats and Republicans agree with you on?
Well, I don't think it falls along partisan lines. I do think it falls along a couple lines. The first is there are people that still believe college athletes should not earn any compensation for their name, image, and likeness, or that they're amateurs, that they're getting a scholarship, and that that's benefit enough. And my argument to them is that debate is over. Once these states started passing these laws, that's not the issue any longer. And unless they want to pass a bill that bans that, which I don't think would pass. So then the second question is, if that debate is no longer going on, what should it look like? And then I think you get into areas where some, want to encourage the ability of student athletes to organize as unions and so forth. With I don't believe that is what the scope of our legislation should be about. It should basically be something that sort of strongly encourages, put it to you that way, the NCAA to put in place these rules that they know they have to put in place. What we don't want to see is a 5-year delay, a 3-year delay, to sort of put off on the back burner kind of deal. So, I think it falls along those two lines, and but there are some that are still resistant to the idea of college athletes being compensated. But I think that argument is no longer relevant because states are already making that decision.
I saw the president weighed in on this yesterday. Colin Kaepernick in the NFL has become a big flashpoint once again. What do you think about the idea of Colin Kaepernick playing in the NFL after not being in the league the last 3 years?
I think that's a football decision. I mean, look, I've said this before. I don't know what condition he's in now. I think he hasn't played since 2016. But at least when I was asked about this a year and a half ago, I just find it hard to believe that there are 64 better quarterbacks in the country than he is, given his background experience. I mean, there are people that are being signed, off the street in their 40s last year, I believe, or a couple of years ago, to come in as backups. So obviously, I don't think that the reason he hasn't been signed is not just football. I mean, obviously, it's the everything that comes with it. I've also said that I agree on the message of racial inequities and discrimination. I don't personally agree that kneeling is the right way to protest it, but I defend his right to do it. He most certainly, as an American, has a right to do it, and I don't think you forfeit that right because you're a professional athlete. I don't think you forfeit that right because you play for an NFL franchise. And I think that's where the league has now arrived. So the issue he points to is a legitimate one. You don't have to agree with the methodology, but I agree he has a right to do it. And ultimately, I think if you're, again, I can't opine as to where he is today compared to the people that are in the league, but at least, a couple of years ago and certainly as of last year, I didn't feel like him not playing in the league was solely a football decision because you see some of the guys that are backup quarterbacks in the NFL and Kaepernick's won a lot more games than some of those guys have and played in the Super Bowl. And so, there's more to it than just football.
Last question for you. What's your favorite football game that you have ever watched, either as a Florida Gator fan or as a Miami Dolphin fan? What do you think about when you go back and kind of, as all fans do, relive fond memories involving your favorite team? What do you think about?
Yeah, 1985 in the Orange Bowl, the Dolphins against the undefeated Bears, and it was an atmosphere unlike any other. As you recall, the Bears, were they had not lost. It's the only game they lost that season. A bunch of the old 72 Dolphins were on the sideline. And and on Monday Night Football, huge packed crowd. I mean, it was electric that night in that place, and that was, I don't think it'd be hard to top it. The Orange Bowl was a special place to play and watch football, and that game itself just set up perfectly, and the Dolphins obviously went on to win that game, and the Bears went on to win that Super Bowl. But there are a lot of other great memories, but that one stands out, I think, in my mind. It'd be hard to match that. I hope so. I hope there'll be some great Tua memory here soon that my kids will get to share with me. But as of right now, that 85 game in the Orange Bowl stands out in my mind.
Do your kids understand how good Dan Marino was?
No. No, they've met him, and they've met him too.
With a lot of guys trying to replace Dan Marino. But when you sit down and talk to your kids, like I was talking to my kids about Jordan, we watched the documentary. But I would imagine as a Dolphin fan, trying to explain to your kids what Dan Marino meant to South Florida is almost impossible, isn't it?
No, yeah, thank God for YouTube, right? So, I remember, I've played, for them some of the incredible, games that things that he was able to do. I recall when he came back from the Achilles, I think it was 94 season, and and I think there was like a fourth and whatever, and he sort of, instead of going for the first down, just lets it go down the right sideline. Irving Fryer makes the catch. They beat the Patriots in this shootout that he had with Drew Bledsoe, moments like that. And I want to be honest with you, as a fan, I think we took it for granted, that we had that in front of us. And they actually met Danny and they've been around him a couple of times and so forth. And they know the guy was a really good player. I just think it's hard to sort of capture that if you didn't live it in the moment. And I think a lot of us took that for granted, and my only regret is Dan Marino didn't play in this NFL, where you couldn't hit a guy over the middle, where you couldn't touch the quarterback. I don't know what kind of numbers he would have put up, but it would be right up there with whatever anyone else is doing right now.
Yeah, and I know I said last question, but now that you mentioned that, how excited were you when Tom Brady left? I know he's with the Bucs, and I know you have to be like, hey, I'm excited that he's in the state of Florida. But as an AFC East Dolphin fan, you had to be ecstatic beyond belief when you heard that Brady was finally leaving Belichick.
Yeah, so the only time the Dolphins have won this division in the last, in the Brady era was the year that he went down with a knee injury. So I don't wish injuries upon anybody. So to me, it was a twofer, right? He's in Tampa Bay playing for a great coach. He's surrounded by a bunch of talent. I think that team is a legit contender, obviously, assuming they can hold it all together and make it happen. And so he's in Florida, so he helps a Florida franchise, but he's out of the AFC East, and that's very good because I think that really opens it up, for the Bills in particular, who I think are a little ahead of the other teams in that division right now, and so it's good. We'll I think it's a 2-for-1. I have no problem saying it. I'm legitimately happy for the Bucs because we don't have to play this guy twice a year.
No kidding. Marco Rubio, I appreciate it. Good luck with the legislation. Thanks for coming on with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
That is Senator Marco Rubio at Marco Rubio. Thank him for coming on.